Good morning, and thank you all for taking the time to join us. Really excited to be a part of this panel, and as was noted at the outset, speaking in person with a group of panelists is something I would have taken for granted 2 years ago, but certainly don't anymore. It's very exciting. I think the fundamental challenge that we are here to discuss has been laid out really well by in some earlier sessions. But fundamentally it's this, that agriculture and our food system have an enormous environmental footprint. In Canada, we're talking about net emissions of 70 megatons, roughly 10% of our national total. And so at a global level, I mean, depending on how you count it, the numbers, the proportion can be even higher. Clearly, as we talk about net zero and ambitious climate objectives, that agriculture has to be part of the solution. At the same time, agriculture is experiencing an unprecedented increase in demand for what it produces, and that is, by all measures, is forecast to continue into the decades ahead. As the global population approaches 10 billion or thereabouts mid-century or in the latter part of the century, that will require, and not only will there be more people to feed on the planet, but as those people get wealthier, they will demand more and better quality foods. And that will require humanity to produce more food than ever before. Some have framed it in terms of the world needing to produce more food in the next 40 years than we have in the preceding 10,000. In the face of that, you've got a volatile and changing climate. You've got limited land and water resources, and you have a deeply perplexing challenge facing public policy and indeed society. There are different avenues of solution, many of which have been discussed in the course of the forum. Certainly, a lot of interest in food, reducing food loss and waste. There is lots of energy around regenerative agriculture, which oftentimes involves looking at past agricultural processes and drawing lessons from them to make practices more environmentally benign. But it's very clear that meeting this challenge will require unprecedented levels of technological innovation. And I think that's really what the focus of this panel is. With that, by way of introduction, let me just briefly introduce the panelists before we'll turn to hear from each of them, beginning with Daniel McCann, CEO and founder of Precision AI. It's a company founded in 2018, I understand, whose specialty is using robotics and drone technology to improve sustainability practice in agriculture. Next to him is Jay Myers, very well-known economic thought leader and commentator in Canada, and presently CEO of Next Generation Manufacturing, one of the superclusters that has been established in this case to bring together collaborative partnerships focused around advanced manufacturing. Previously, Jay was president and CEO of Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Next to Jay is Marc Nantel, who's vice president of research and external relations at Niagara College, to bring a post-secondary perspective on the issue. And I would note as well that Mark, I understand, had some difficulties in getting here this morning, so thank him for his persistence, and really pleased that he was able to also join in person. And at my far left is Jonathan Goodkey, who's principal industrial innovation venture fund at BDC Capital, to bring an investment perspective. Jonathan's an experienced investment professional with a focus on agri-food technology from the farm to fork, covering the entire value chain prior to joining BDC in 2019. Jonathan was a principal at Iviro Capital. So with that, Perhaps I'll just invite Daniel to offer a few opening remarks.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome, everybody. I guess to follow up on Tom's wonderful introduction there, we're about to enter an era where agriculture and food technologies is going to go through a period of rapid growth and rapid change. It's one of the industries in the world, one of the few industries in the world that has yet to benefit from the advancements in artificial intelligence and automation that have really improved the efficiency of so many other industries in the world. And despite the fact that there's been a lot more technology introduced onto the farm, it's still very fragmented and it's still very scattered. And you're going to see these types of things become more and more commonplace because, as Tom mentioned, one of the challenges, of course, is that there's a fixed amount of arable land in the world. And by 2050, we're going to need 70% more food than we do today. So if you do the math, that means that if we have to feed the world, we're going to have to grow food smarter. And the way to do that is through technologies, and particularly sustainable technologies, because it needs to be done in a much more environmentally friendly way.
As Tom was saying, well, first of all, I got to say what a great pleasure it is to be here in person, and how terrible it feels to actually have a tie on. Great to be here. I run an organization called Next Generation Manufacturing Canada, which is the organization that leads Canada's advanced manufacturing supercluster. And we look at advanced manufacturing and there are all aspects of value chain, and in the case of agriculture or environmental technology, everything from the farm and the technology through to actual applications in food processing or in logistics or in actual delivery to the final consumer. I guess my key interest, I mean, we've been talking about technologies and agriculture, and there's been a lot of discussion about particular applications of technology in developing new food products, in improving information systems and the data, and leading to greater precision and predictability and so forth in the farm sector and all the way through the agricultural value chain. My focus, though, is really on the business of what makes this work. Technologies are tools. What actually is driving the transformations that we're seeing? And I can tell you from the perspective of superclusters, what we do is develop collaborative relationships among the best in research, the best in technology, and of course the applications in agriculture or processing or logistics or manufacturing to develop something that is really world leading. And I think that's the type of systems-oriented value chain approach that we need to take if we're really going to make progress in this transformation in agriculture.
Thank you. Yes, it is wonderful to be in person anywhere, frankly, other than my house. And thank you for having me. As a Vice President of External Relations and Research at Niagara College, I'm right in between with my two friends here. To some degree, it's about technology and about companies, and I'm throwing in education and training and people for good measure. Because at the college, we do research in three areas: manufacturing, food and beverage. We're in Niagara. It's hard to avoid that one. And in agriculture and the environment. And our Center in Agriculture and Environment tackle everything from farms, cash crops on the farm and fields to greenhouses and cannabis. And so bringing technology to those fields is part of what we do with our research center, or Agriculture and Environmental Technology Innovation Center, is try to help companies design and develop new products, new processes, new services that they'll be able to commercialize and become more competitive on the world market, hire some of our graduates, maybe, and modernize how they do everything. We'll talk maybe later about a thing we started called the Greenhouse Technology Network. And it's not called the Greenhouse Network, it's called the Greenhouse Technology Network, because it's about developing technologies for the greenhouse and address several of the aspects we'll discuss today. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here in person as well, and maybe I can offer a bit of insight to the capital side of the equation in in the egg and food world and how that relates to sustainability. I'm with the Industrial Innovation Fund, Venture Capital Fund with BDC. Dan and his company is actually an investment of ours, and it's right in the sweet spot for the marriage of talent, technology, sustainability, on farm in Canada with an enormous vision, a game-changing technology to just change the way farming is done in a more sustainable way. And it's those types of projects that our fund seeks to back. I focus on the farm to food value chain. It's a really exciting time right now. When I first started in the VC world in 2015, no one you talked to even knew what ag tech was. It was not a term. Anytime I mentioned it, people thought I was saying egg tech. Like, you really spend all day thinking about eggs. Like, that's crazy. But right now, it's one of the key drivers to the excitement is sustainability. And we can talk about this throughout the panel too, but the success or lack thereof of the first generation of the ag technologies, it's important that we have a few Canadian success stories to retain the capital, the excitement, and the next generation of entrepreneurs to really drive forward the sustainability story in Canada. And Dan and Precision AI are a great example of that, and happy to be here today to dive into it.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you all. Maybe we'll circle back to Dan. Jonathan had mentioned that the venture capital fund that he's affiliated with had invested in your firm, but I just want to want to eventually go to all of you to get your perspectives on the SME experience for Canadian firms in this space. I mean, certainly scaling SMEs and finding capital isn't, I don't think, unique to the ag tech space, but in general, Canada is thought of as an area where innovation systems sometimes gets tripped up. So maybe, Dan, if you just talk to us a little bit about your experience and any broader lessons that you think can be drawn for other startups in ag tech in this country.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. The ag tech is a really interesting vertical from an SME standpoint, and particularly if you're a startup, with grand visions of changing the way food is produced. The traditional venture capital model out there, where you've got potentially 5 to 7 years to get your return on investment, doesn't really work the same way in ag tech. And the reason for that is because ag tech is a type of industry where you've got these vast swaths of land out in the middle of nowhere, serving potentially tens of thousands of acres at a time. And when you think about the customer, when you think about the farmer, they might put, let's say, 30 crops in their life in the ground. So with your new technology that you come onto the market with, the farmer or the producer is trusting you with 1/30 of their lifetime revenue potential, right? And what that means is that stuff's got to work. And so you have to spend a lot more time and a lot more capital in the R&D and in the what I call prove it phases than you do in traditionally other industries where you can kind of ship half-baked products and let your users be your beta testers, right? You don't get that luxury. And so typically, even then, the sales cycles tend to be, for example, a 2 to 3 year trust building cycle. And then when you finally build that trust, then it goes geometric. And that's where you get the real growth. But it takes a while to get there. So you need capital that's both patient, but that also understands the payoff, right? Because it's one of the very few industries in the world where the lifetime value of the customer is potentially generational. Right, if you think about the big farm equipment that's out there, right? I'm a John Deere farm, and I've been a John Deere farm for since my grandpa's days, right? So when you win big, but it takes a long time and a lot of capital to get there. So to your point, how do you do that in a model where everybody expects immediate payoff, right? And so you need to find those investors and find those people that are willing to place those big bets and have the patience to understand that this is a technology that not just can produce a good quality business, but also have downstream benefits in terms of not just the profitability of the customer, but the sustainability advantages and how you're going to leave the world in a better place than you do today. And these are all essential parts of the story of ag tech that need to be told from an SME standpoint if you're going to find that capital.
Thanks, Dave. Maybe just go back to you, Jonathan. I mean, you already touched on why you chose to invest in Dan's company, and just invite you to build on on his remarks, either about your experience with precision AI or just more generally the SME space in this in ag tech.
Well, Dan touched on a few key points from an investor's point of view. Capital efficiency is a big consideration, especially for a VC, where you're hunting for moonshots, and historically, that means venture capital goes to capital efficient businesses like software and social and consumer focused businesses. Ag is almost the polar opposite, right? Where you have super long sales cycles, a lot of hand-to-hand combat, selling directly to farmers. That's capital intensive, and relationships are super important. You got to build long-term relationships with farmers before you sell to them, and they got to trust you. And ag gets a hard rap because, sometimes folks that come from other industries and have a different perspective, which is very helpful, but they kind of get discouraged that, farmers aren't going to adopt new technology, which is not really the case. They're excited to adopt new technologies, especially this new younger generation. They are all about it, but it has to fit within their ecosystem of every other technology they're using on the farm. It has to work. They need service and support, which a lot of other industries don't need, and that all takes a lot of money. So Dan and Precision AI, there's a lot of good initiatives right now with non-dilutive grant funding, with SDTC, Protein Industries Canada, that provide good funding for organizations like Dan to have a good base to work from, get a great staff to start building, and it provides leverage for the VC community. And in Dan's case in particular, that was somewhat helpful in attracting foreign investors who are more focused and have expertise on AI and robotics and engineering that can really help the company. That's frankly, that expertise might not be found in Canada at this point in time. And the marriage of talent, financial support, and being right close to farmers in Regina is a recipe for success. I mean, the past fund I worked for, Avrio, was the first financial backer of Farmers Edge that's recently went public. And these are kind of 10, 15-year overnight success stories that, the public sees them 15 years later but it's a lot of time and effort. And so Dan has built a good kind of framework and has the support of a community and a financial community, a government community, and partners on farm that give us a chance at really changing the game.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Mark, Jonathan already touched on the importance of talent to SMEs, and we will talk about labor-related issues a little bit later on. But just in terms of the role that talent plays, that post-secondary institutions can play in accelerating technology development, just invite any thoughts you may have.
Yeah, well, there's at least two levels there. I mean, there's the research and innovation level. Working with companies, professors at universities and colleges can help solve some problems or even preempt some to arrive and develop new intellectual properties that can be commercialized. And then there's, of course, the education of the people who will be working in that field. So those go hand in hand. On the complex thing about education of people to go into that field is partly touched on by Jonathan. It sometimes takes 15 years for something to be the big thing. So somebody comes to a university or a college saying, okay, I want to study technology that will be applied to agriculture. It's sometimes hard to say, well, the next big thing is going to be AI, or it's going to be sensors in the ground, or it's going to be a different type of big data, or robotics, right? So we're often the folks who are going to be working in ag tech, as opposed to ag, are going to be the tech people. They're going to be folks coming out of computer science, coming out of mathematics, coming out of physics, coming out of engineering. And often we don't teach them specifically about farming, right? They have to actually pick it up as they go along. All three of our research centers, whether it's food and beverage, manufacturing, or agriculture, are all involved with agriculture and food. And eventually, if somebody who comes through our Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Center will learn about robotics, will learn about vegetable picking in a greenhouse, in some projects they'll do, but they may end up working for Boeing. So it's one of those things that it's hard to actually dial in. On the research side of things, maybe we'll talk a little bit later on the types of technologies that come through. Jonathan mentioned, that the farming community wants to adopt new technologies, but as was also said, you have to build the trust in that technology. Farmer's not going to turn his or her field over to this new fangled bright things that shine if it's going to cost a year or two of good crops, right? So it's a bit of a dance between the education and training, the research, and then the end client, if you want, or the end beneficiary, which is the farming industry.
Okay, thanks so much. And Jay, I'd just be curious to get your thoughts at this juncture on what public policy can do to support startups in the ag tech space or just more generally in the technology space, particularly with reference to any international examples that you think are good practices that you may be aware of.
Yeah, maybe talk about four things. First of all, how important the capital is. Vision without money is hallucination. And you really need the capital, the patient capital to back it up. And at a point, I think it's the same thing in ag as in manufacturing or in any other industry. At a point where you are proving the technology, where you're demonstrating the technology and scaling up a technology that can be actually integrated into a customer solution. And that is not necessarily, it's certainly later stage technology readiness, but it's early stage customer readiness here to really be able to integrate those technologies productively in what the customer's business is. Which is, I think, the second thing is where a number of organizations and research and development centers and Mark Center in Niagara offer demonstrations, offer test beds for farmers, for anybody else in the food value chain, or for advanced manufacturing. And it's that, believe it when we see it, and we want to test it. And if we're going to do something ourselves, we don't really want to do it in-house. We'd like to find some skunk works that can, and expertise that can help us and then transfer knowledge there. So that those types of technology adoption and transfer centers, I think, are extremely important and best practice worldwide. I think the other thing, too, is, and going back to what Jonathan and why everybody's been talking about, the interaction between the tech provider and the customer. Often the customer actually doesn't know they may have a great idea about the outcome they want, but they may not be able to know or identify what the problem is, or even what the solution is that they're looking for. So there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done to connect tech to a customer. And part of that is testing and proving. But also it is, and I think this is where right across especially in Canada with small companies, but it's also worldwide, focusing on, it's not necessarily best practice, but a roadmap for successful implementation of the technology, so that customers understand how a technology solution that might be integrated across a number of technologies can actually help solve the business problems that they have. As we were setting up the supercluster, we did a survey with StatsCan that said, look, 80% of manufacturers in Canada, 6,000 manufacturers in the survey, 80% had invested in a technology, advanced technology over the previous 3 years. And then they asked, well, what were the business objectives of product development, process improvement, and so forth? And the most interesting question is, did you achieve your business objective? and 3/4 said no. And that's not a technology issue. That's a management, leadership, strategy, management issue, process control issue, and a skills issue, because they may not have the skills to handle it. So successful policy programs look at that the systems here, and including the infrastructure, the logistics, the standards infrastructure that needs to be put in place in order to actually get successful, productive adoption and scale up.
Thanks so much, Jay, and thank you all. And as promised, I think I'd like to, so a number of you have already touched on issues related to labor and skills, and I'd like to explore that a little bit more. And there's sort of two facets of it. One of them is in primary agriculture, but also in other segments of the value chain. I'm thinking of meatpacking here. Certainly, there have been longstanding issues with a shortage of labor in horticulture and other labor-intensive segments of the industry, with the so-called Great Resignation that we're seeing not just in Canada but across much of the world. Those problems are being exacerbated, and so I'd be curious to talk a little bit about automation and its capacity to reduce the need for lower skilled, often lower wage labor. And I'll go to you shortly, Jay, because I understand that your organization is active in that space. Mm-hmm. The other element, of course, of talent and skills that several of you have already talked about, but I'd be curious to explore a little bit further, is more in terms of the talent base, the skill set that's required for Canada to be successful in the ag tech space, and what that means for the types of education and development that we need to have that talent pool here. But I'll maybe go to you, Jay, on both questions, but particularly curious to hear your thoughts on examples of technology displacing or reducing the need for labor that's becoming increasingly scarce in Canada.
Yeah, and a lot of people have focused on the impact that technology and transformation has on employment. And of course, there's a correlation there. But I think it's the reverse of what many people think. It's the fact that skilled labor and labor generally, may be in high demand and short supply. And that's the most automated, the highest concentration of robots in the world, the highest concentration of companies that are fully automated, including small companies, are in those economies where they've got the biggest labor problems here. So I think there certainly is a correlation. I'm not so sure that agriculture is any different than manufacturing in this respect, but 25%, quarter of Canada's manufacturing workforce is going to be retired in the next 10 years. And we know that because they're all over 55. The younger generation represents about 4% of the current workforce. So you can do the math. Here, just keep production levels constant. Companies are going to have to increase productivity by 25-30%. So they're going to have to become much more automated and more tech intensive. But at the same time, the people who are working in those companies need to be much more highly skilled at the same time. So I think that we are certainly seeing, I think, demographic pressures pushing companies and businesses to become much more automated. There's an issue here, though, because if you are investing in technology, you're investing in a fixed asset. If you're investing in labor, it's a variable cost for your business. And in agriculture in particular, it's a seasonal business. So you may not need people all the time, and you're able to increase or decrease your workforce. And you're not able to do that if you're heavily invested in equipment or technology. So there is a business balance here, and I think that goes for many companies. But I guess my general, and I really would like to hear the comments of my other panelists on this, and it goes to your second question, Tom. Is it easier to teach someone digital skills and bring them into the agricultural workforce? Or is it easier to teach someone agricultural skills and find people and then train people to become much more adept at digital technology? And I know from the manufacturing standpoint, it's much easier to find people with digital skills these days. And I know everybody is really concerned about young people and making sure that they have digital skills. Most of the people I hear saying that don't have the digital skills themselves and are worried about kids that can use digital technology like crazy. Here, I'm not concerned about young people with developing digital skills. I'm concerned about whether young people want to come into agriculture, want to come into manufacturing in the first place, and can see a career that is enticing for them to do that. And sure, they need digital skills, but unless they come into the sector, here we're still going to be facing some major labor issue problems in the future.
I'll just jump in there. One of the major kind of things that ag and food has going for it on that is the sustainability story. Mm-hmm. The millennial Gen Z generation really wants to align their whole life, career, purchase decisions around their values. The top of that list for a lot of folks right now is the environment, sustainability. So if they can get a job and use their tech skills in an impactful way, we're seeing a lot of more interest there, I would say. And on the labor piece, for like the business plans that I see that really most prevalently that comes up as a major kind of economic driver is on like the vertical farming, the automation around indoor grow, vertical farming. There's a drastic cut to the amount of labor, low skill labor required in field with the move to growing things indoors. And then there's always the age-old question to add on to what you said about what comes first, kind of chicken or the egg on talent in tech or industry expertise. But then on the entrepreneurial side, it's always, is that made or not born? And, can you teach an entrepreneur, risk-taking and creativity and building an organization? And we could talk for hours and maybe not come to a conclusion there, but someone like Dan, who, it's kind of in his blood, started other companies, wants to take risk, wants to change the world, very key to this whole paradigm of changing and creating value for everyone. What Canada kind of has sometimes lacked in this industry is that generation before that can be very great mentors, want to give back and help folks avoid some of the mistakes that are catastrophic sometimes. So, I've seen examples firsthand where that entrepreneur who, had a successful exit wants to invest in the industry generally because they're very attached to it, but also can give back, in a 10x type way, like here's some things not to do. Mm-hmm. That's super powerful.
That's important because a lot of agriculture is also an art, and you need the knowledge that came from the previous generation to pass on to the next one. The next one is not going to solve everything with, gizmos. And so that's important. And back to the question that Jay was mentioning too, is it easier to teach a farmer to digital or a digital to farm, so to speak? I think we may be at an inflection point in the sense that there's something that Joëlle Pinault from the AI Institute in Montreal, I think she's at McGill, said a couple years ago that stuck with me, is that we always say, oh no, if we bring in the robots, everybody's going to lose their jobs and it's going to be terrible. But at the turn of the 20th century, 1900s, a huge proportion of people were on the food production side of things, like 90% or something. And then now it's more like 5-10% of the population makes food. Did everybody become unemployed? No. Other industries came up, other ways of earning a living and being productive in societies came up. So the inflection point I'm thinking about is that while it might have been easier to take a bunch of people who farm and teach them digital because the farming was the base, everybody kind of knew something about it. Now I think is you can take as a given that folks will know digital. And that's a platform technology. And then they'll apply it to banking, they'll apply it to automotive, they'll apply it to other things. Teaching them the farming bit, though, that's going to be the tricky bit, because that's a specialized skill with the mentorship necessary to not make mistakes. And so it kind of turns a little bit upside down how one has to prepare the workforce. You can almost assume that they'll be at least digital, they'll be able to learn about digital stuff because they have a general understanding of it. But the actual sector knowledge is in the ag in this case, or in the ag technology, right? So that changes a little bit how one sees things that way. It's like, how are you going to build this population of people who can do ag in a sustainable way? Well, you almost have to say, okay, people will know how to learn digital. Now let's focus on, the transfer of technology, the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of the art into these people.
Look, just before we go back to Dan, I just wanted to invite you to pick up on some of the points Jonathan made about what attracts people. Just I would assume that a lot of the students at Niagara will be the millennials and Gen Zs, and if you have any thoughts to share in terms of getting physicists or mathematicians to work in the ag space, what attracts people to the ag space, what for students particularly of that generation, what the turn-ons and turn-offs are of different educational paths and career paths.
What we found in the research students that we have, and again, these are not master's or PhD students, they're undergraduate students at the college doing research projects, is big data is a big attraction. And you can apply big data to a whole bunch of things, whether it's climate change, whether it's efficiency in the manufacturing place, or whether it's ag. And the students who have been interested in doing ag tech research at Niagara College were the computer science majors, were the people who are GIS, GPS students who deal with data. They've been very much interested in joining that. We have whole programs on greenhouse technicians also. Those are more the people who come from the ag attraction side of things. But on the ag tech, it's the robotics, it's the big data, and the people from those programs who say, I can apply my knowledge to this very important field, pun intended, field, and then they come to it.
One of the sectors I see kind of the most blending of different fields in the university ecosystem in Canada now is the cellular agriculture, lab-grown meats. You're attracting a lot of kind of diversified backgrounds to a really kind of sexy space right now.
Welcome your thoughts on any of the various questions that are on the table, but particularly curious about your experience as an entrepreneur starting a company. Presumably you've had to recruit talents, and what your experience has been with that.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's a great topic for that, because I've seen a shift over the last number of years. Historically, with new graduates and really smart people, and even high-level people at other companies that might be looking for a change, they have more choice now than they've ever had. There's companies everywhere doing all sorts of interesting things, but what we're actually seeing now is it's not just about the money, and it's not just about working on maybe some cool startup or some cool technology. What's driving the younger generation now is working on something that makes a difference, right? They want to make sure that they're working on something that's going to leave the planet in a better shape for themselves or for their kids, and they're choosing to actually go to companies that have strong sustainability missions. So at Precision AI, we're focused on dramatically reducing the chemical footprint of agriculture through use of artificial intelligence and robotics. So basically, advanced robots that can see the field, scan the field, and basically precision spray only the things that need to be sprayed and leave everything else untouched. And so when you start thinking about and you start pitching this idea of we're going to reduce chemical use by 95% in the field and fresh water use by 50%, and we're going to leave we're going to completely revolutionize how food is supposed to be or is going to be grown. I'm recruiting really, really strong talent based on that vision, because they believe in the vision, and they believe that the work they're doing actually has meaning that transcends just the number that shows up in their bank account.
Well, and maybe Dan, you can talk a little bit about your transition from fintech to ag tech, what attracted you?
Yeah, that's thanks, Jonathan. That's a great point because I've come from a diverse background. I was always sort of historically the entrepreneur that just saw an opportunity and went for it. And and one of my companies in the background was a fintech, so to wind up in precision agriculture is actually totally different. Actually, my family jokes about that a lot because I grew up. I wasn't the farmer, but my whole extended family all was. And when I grew up, I hated the farm, just hated it. They dragged me out there, and I just wanted to be on my technology and work on the computers and stuff. And so now that I've come back onto the farm, I've come full circle. They're actually laughing and say that I couldn't resist the allure, which I guess is true. But it's it's the same thing that Jonathan mentioned, right? Like I've always been the type of entrepreneur that thought big. I want to change the world. I just don't want to make money. I want to do something that has some actual meaning. And looking at the inefficiencies in agriculture and looking at the problems, like for example the problem that we're tackling with spraying, right? A lot of the stuff is based on human limitations. Mm-hmm. Right, a human being can't possibly go through, and I think in an acre of field, there's about a million heads of wheat if you're to grow wheat, and a human being can't possibly go through the field and do, check out each plant and see if it's healthy or see if it's a weed or whatever and deal with those things. So we come up with these technologies that are terrible for the environment, but they're the only way to get enough food production out of those lands. Right? And so now with the advent of artificial intelligence and robotics, you can develop solutions that can just completely change the game. Now you can create robots that are capable of looking at each individual plant and getting the job done. And that also sort of solves some of the labor challenges as well, just to sort of circle this back to the original question. Because what COVID showed us, if you've ever been close to a farm, is that, historically during the growing season, they import lots of labor, right? To work on the farm from either the surrounding communities or even, other countries. And COVID stopped that. And so there was a crisis this year on the farm of just not having enough people to actually get the work done. And that's where things like automation can come in and change the game, where to deal with the fact that we have to have this really sort of labor-intensive industry, if you can invest into these types of technologies, you actually can compensate for that and actually strengthen food security too.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, it's also a question of these really low-paying jobs that are low-paying because somebody needs to make money along the supply chain, and the people at the end, the customer, can't or won't pay too much for their food. Mm-hmm. And so if you can't pay too much for your food and everybody along the line has to somehow make a living, then the person who does the actual farming is in a tough position. And where robots could help is that if they don't have to pay a whole bunch of people, probably badly anyway, to work on their farm, it's an advantage all of a sudden. I don't want to make a weird comparison, but through the pandemic, we saw lots of people leave the hospitality world, and we're hearing they're not coming back. It's hard to find staff for restaurants and hotels and all that. And I know some of our students, we have programs in hospitality and in food and beverage, and some of them are reevaluating their choice of career because they say, yeah, you know what? This is pretty bad pay and bad hours, in some cases, which can be good for a beginning of career, but as you get along. So folks rethink these kind of choices, and nobody wants to pay too expensive to eat in a restaurant. Well, then, something's got to change. In agriculture, there is, for several years, been this upswing towards robotics. Whether it's in the greenhouse or in the field, you can dot print your field with your seeder or with your combine to decide, where to put more seeds, where to spray more or less. It's great. And that's just a more general robotic aspect. But when it comes to tender fruit or vines and things like that, where you require somebody to look, you need a robot with a camera and some kind of way to interpret, is that grape ready? Is there enough sugar? Is it going to be good for the wine? And all this is done by people right now. As we get into more robotics, I think we'll find ways to keep the prices affordable while not giving really bad salaries to people who could really deserve better.
And Tom, I just wanted to comment too on what is attracting young people into industry generally, and couldn't agree more. It's young people want to make a difference. We launched a campaign over the summer called Careers of the Future, and the idea was to attract young people, next generation high school students, basically, and primary schools, to think about advanced manufacturing manufacturing. And of course, their first concept was this is dirty, dull, repetitive, and then you explain what advanced manufacturing is like, and it's this is great. So we started off by highlighting the technology, and we were getting a little bit of pickup. And then we switched into highlighting how industry can contribute to solving some big challenges like COVID and other healthcare solutions and food security and greenhouse gas emission reductions and so forth. And I tell you, the response rates just went through the roof when we did that. And the most interesting thing was, on our website, we're counting, it's amazing how much you can actually track these days in terms of media. But 56% of all of the engaged site visits on our website, and there were about 250,000 of them, came from females when we did that. So it really does, I think, speak to the demographics and the fact that we have a lot of underrepresented communities that we can look to, I think, in all sectors of industry for and excite them about what the future looks like.
That's great. I see that time is marching on. I do want to circle back with each of you. I can give you about a minute each. We're also, I would note, competing against, it's nearly lunchtime here in Toronto. And maybe, Jonathan, I'll start with you. And I just note, of course, we are in Toronto, which is one of the fastest growing tech centers in North America. And you touched a little bit earlier on vertical ag and some of the opportunities you're seeing there. Just more generally on urban agriculture, I know there are examples of it within a few blocks of where we're seated. So I just invite you to quickly offer any thoughts you have in that regard and anything else you were hoping to say.
Sure. Well, I didn't really prepare any talking points, but like vertical ag is, it's been around for a few years now. It's attracted a lot of capital. There has been more challenges than some folks expected. It's a harder problem to farm things indoors when you're dealing with, biology, pest pressure, disease, water issues. So it's going to get there. It has experienced some challenges. The thing to keep important, I think, in all these conversations, in at least from my perspective, is it starts with the consumer. And that drives back to the farm, to the indoor farm. What do consumers want? They want sustainability. Indoor farm, it's using the robotics and technology to get it to them at a price, to get what consumers want.
Yeah, it's if I can jump in, it's also, you have to look at who the consumer is. And also, there are some consumers in places in the world where things don't grow in the ground that well. Whether it's up north or in places where it's arid. And interior growing, now that we have LEDs for lights, now that we have a lot of sensors, you can grow heads of salads up north that won't actually cost $15 because they have to be trucked and planed from around here. And that's very important. And it's more sustainable. If you have technologies like LEDs and you generate the electricity through sun or solar or other renewable energies, then all of a sudden agriculture can be where it should be. Geographically, and it can be where it should be on the sustainable spectrum, right? So I think there are great possibilities there with the controlled environment or interior growing.
Jay, just any concluding thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, well, I guess two other things that we could think about here. One is, one goes back to the whole system of getting food from the farm to the table, and couldn't agree more that it has to be consumer driven at the end of the day. There's so much waste in that system that I live just outside of Guelph, and we've been working with the local Wellington and Guelph group mapping out the food chain here, only to find that by the time the consumer gets the food, 82% of what has been produced has been wasted. And so that itself it's not primarily a tech issue. It's a management issue, and a process issue, and a value chain issue, a supply chain issue here. And I think we need to focus on that. Second thing I'd say is let's look beyond agriculture. We're in the business of supporting supporting projects in biomaterials. We're growing much of those biomaterials here in Canada. So what we're growing can be used it's not just food, all sorts of different projects with huge benefits for the environment here.
Dan, we've got just a few seconds left. Any concluding thoughts you want to share?
Sure, no, that's fine. Just briefly, I think what you're going to see very quickly is you're starting to see the sustainability push in agriculture drive change in a way you haven't seen yet, but you're going to see very, very soon. Right now, there's sort of two classes of commodities that are produced, and one is organics, and then there's everything else. And in every industry like wine or craft beer, you see a decommoditization happening, and now you're starting to see an emerging market for sustainably grown commodities. Because there's consumer demand. So as consumers, if we drive for sustainably grown foods, you're actually going to see that put pressure on the buyers and then likewise put pressure on the farmers, and the whole ecosystem will become sustainable. And so from a technology standpoint, from our perspective, really the only way to grow these types of foods more sustainably is through technology. So I think as consumers push for more, we're going to see more and more tech get on the farm to create sort of the better footprint of agriculture from a sustainability and ecological perspective.
Thank you so much. We've run a little bit over time, but thank you all for your attention, and thanks to the panelists. It was really interesting, a great deal of fun.
Great. Well, thanks, Adam.
Thank you so much.